Wow. Okay, so last night I had a, a friend over and had a couple drinks, and then made my video, right? And I kept it on for, I guess I got 60 something views, and then I privatized it, and it reminded me of my why it is I privatize videos. You know, I don't keep them out. Um, and I've developed multiple reasons, always multiple reasons. Always, it seems like multiple reasons for things that I'm doing prior to doing it. And then in retrospect, looking at it in terms of justification and expression. And the relationship that I had and have with this person, it was so emotionally centered, and we seemed as if we had gotten along so well, that just the coincidence of us meeting, the odds of us meeting, in terms of people who share chronic pain, right, who bring it on themselves, or who move themselves dangerously, very gruffly through life, right, play to the down to some extent. The odds of finding this in this other person at this moment somehow had me meet myself and feel incredibly comfortable with myself. So much so that the exteriority of myself, as other people reflecting back to me, I kind of didn't care, right? So I kind of thought, like, okay, I'm going to break out, I'm going to lash out. So I started with the lash process, right? Okay, this is going to be an avenge and a fuck you video, and something to that effect. Now, a lot of this comes from a history of watching colors being laid down, and laying down colors and analyzing people's paintings, where you'd see the heat of a color increase from one stripe or one gradation, like in a sky. The gradation's always been interesting to me, but when you see the way a painter lays down a particular color, a particular warm color, next to a warmer color, next to a warmer color, and you start to understand how it is they're stroking the canvas, or you see how much attention is given to a bottom layer of paint, and then how the attention and the manner in which the paint is laid on top of it, right? Like a lot of illustration, I make certain that there's just this really pristine, very light movement left to right going on the canvas. And then I make certain to paint over the top of that also in the same direction, so I can smooth everything out to make it seamless. And I of course use oil because it's smoother and softer than acrylic, and because it's longer dry time, and you can extend that dry time, but the length of the dry time plays into how much more you can feather the edges and put it all together nice and neatly. But I remember this time in life where I had taken the most pristine paintings I could make into this gallery, and they rejected them, and they brought me over to this other painter who had been laying the strokes down very methodically, but very thick amounts of paint on the end of the brush. and laying them down. And maybe this video will go on into a couple, maybe 2 or 3. I don't know how important it is. But what ended up happening was that I had somehow felt that my nuance, my feathering, my technique, or the not allowing another technique to lay on top of, where you're using multiple techniques to complete a painting. So not only do you have smooth underpainting and a nice secondary layer, but that you have a thickness on top of it. And somehow this reminded me once again of playing drums. But it reminded me of this time of life that I had moved against a natural grain, and it was like a fight. Like I found my best interest and I moved against it, and then I justified it, and I realized that I had made a very crucial error. And at that time, the next process that I learned, because I kept learning different mediums and different processes of painting, was a subtractive technique, to lay down oil onto illustration board and use electric erasers to pull up the paint. So lay it down thicker and then pull it up, and then lay it down again and then re-pull it up, and continue wetting it and re-pulling it up. And so now it wasn't about it wasn't down putting it down as much as it was about how to pull it off. And all of a sudden, what was happening with these metaphors of not only subtraction and rejection and moving against one's interest was this sense of kind of comedy that became more about theatrics and about presentation. And then I remember I had learned the difference. Somebody saying, hey, an experiment and an experience are rooted in the same thing, meaning if you experiment with life, that's how you're spending that portion of life. It's also an experience. Like, you can't get back your life. Life is what you do. But I was always wondering, because when I hang art, and I'm hanging in public, and I watch people come up, you always know the artist because they get really close, because they're paying very particular attention to how your strokes are laid, what colors you're using, your attention to heat and warmth and such. And I remember thinking about the direction, like in playing drums, of moving to get this sound is this cymbal, this one's this drum, this one's this drum, until your body's in this kinetic modality. And I remember having direct, like a three-dimensional kind of, like I was rolling, like a rolling pin, that all of a sudden I could see how people were communicating with one another, right? As if it was a paint style, a certain stylistic of painting. And that generally there's a static approach, which is considered acceptable, right? But then you get these wild techniques, because when I paint in a very illustrative style, I could show it in a conservative state, and people gobble it up. But when I take it to a non-conservative state, they're wanting something a little more fauve, a little more wild, a little more scratchy, right? Because I also remember a painting style where you let somebody else paint on your painting, and you collaborate on a painting, and some people can destroy it, or they rip it, and they're subtracting, and you take a palette and you rip somebody else's paint off, or even when it's wet, you're re-approaching it, and you're distorting what it is they're doing. It's kind of a vandalism. And then, so I was thinking about how in LA, people have sharp elbows, right? I was rolled down there a couple times for my wallet and money. And I remember thinking about how men can kind of relate in certain jabs. Like you don't toy with the soft. You toy with the softy a little bit, right? But it's kind of always this weird, like, how far is too far is really based on whether or not you're going to use a canvas, or you're going to paint on cardboard, or you're going to paint on masonite. It's like, what is the ground? First of all, right? You have to assume a ground in socializing. So when I say a roller, it was as if I was able to take a metaphor of life and subtraction and grit and moving from conservative to more fauve or wild colors, and juxtaposing, instead of heat and cold, it's now more about how thick and how layered the paint can be, how wild the actual end product is when you see it in the flesh instead of a digital image. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I was thinking about what it means to start out with fuck you, right? Like some people that I attack are not subscribed to me, right? And then my viewer count, it's almost like I want it to privatize and analyze what's being said in the notes, and maybe even attack the people in the notes, right? Like somebody mentioned, like, oh, you're not following the negative theology, and they're being defensive in this last video. And I thought, but I am. I'm moving against the standardized ground of what might be considered acceptable civil discourse. I'm still legal because I'm using language, but now I kind of want to move against other people's, their primary limitations. Somebody's going to say something is rational, and they're going to ground that, right? Some people are like, they're so set on what is the case, and it's still just an argument, right? And so I'm always like, I keep thinking, scratch away, function in negation, forward movement in negation. Keep the sharp elbows, move the conversation from the conservative palette to the wild palette, to the layering, to the thick pull and the push and the nastiness. And utilize this as like, wow, how is my whole channel formulated? Because I remember when I started my channel, I came in with this like very like kind of claw thing, right? And then I was going to ride up people who I respected to see, in fact, if we could mirror the ground from which they start. Not to mirror it, but to play it, the guy's game, the chumming, like, gotcha, right? I don't tend to attack women in general, and it might be because. And perhaps I look for this, but go beyond the bounds, right, in attacking. But there's certain formations that are going on in geometries now amongst the characters. Make a stroke upward to this character. Make a stroke downward to this character, right? A wise monkey rips my thesis off. Of sex as just oral communication and reapplies it as I hope so. But I don't call him an ass, right? So I skip him moving this way, but I make certain I scratch this way and throw in an unknown and privatize the video. And I'm not certain of what the experiment is. It's all like an impromptu music. It's like I'm painting something with my channel that's not built, and I'm not certain how it's put together yet. And it's good. It's good that I'm aware that that's what's happening, because it's been these weird pillars of parasitic twists and always attempting not only to find negation, but learning where people's soft spots may be, until it comes back to the theatrics. So I keep moving in and out, eventually from conservative to ripped to kind.